The night fell over Ouagadougou like a thick mantle of silence. The wind carried red dust from the dry fields, and the streetlights flickered with a yellowish glow that seemed to hesitate in existing. Inside the headquarters of the armed forces, General Ibrahim Traoré sat at a simple table, staring fixedly at a brown envelope that lay sealed before him. There was no one else in the room. No sound except the distant hum of a generator. The letter had arrived anonymously. No signature, just a foreign stamp and 3 handwritten words on the back. "It's your blood's blood." He didn't want to open that envelope. He already knew. He felt it in his bones. Betrayal has a specific smell, something between metal and wet earth, and that day, since early morning, the entire city's air carried that scent. For 3 nights, he had dreamed of a child crying at the border, clutching a tattered flag. And for 3 mornings in a row, he had woken with a tight throat, as if he had swallowed the ashes of a secret too old to be spoken aloud. Traoré took a deep breath. His hands were steady. He was trained for this, trained to endure more than any ordinary man, trained to keep his spine straight, even when the ground beneath his feet was pulled away. But nothing had prepared him for this. As he tore open the envelope, he saw the photographs first. One showed a familiar face, his own brother, Dawood Traoré, sitting beside 2 men in a luxurious restaurant in Washington. In the next image, he was shaking hands with a man Traoré recognized from intelligence reports, a CIA analyst. The third showed documents, maps of Burkina Faso's military movements, with annotations in English, confidentiality stamps, and the signature, Dawood's signature. The pain was as immediate as it was profound. Ibrahim Traoré didn't blink. He didn't shout. He merely closed his eyes for a few seconds and let the silence of the room touch the depths of his chest. It was his younger brother, the boy he had carried on his shoulders, the same one with whom he had shared a single plate of food in childhood when hunger bit like a ravenous snake, the boy he had protected when foreign soldiers first came to their village. But now, that boy had sold himself, and not to just anyone. He had sold his soul and the secrets of their homeland to the empire that for decades had plundered their land, exploited their mines, destroyed their villages, and sown fear in the hearts of their people. Traoré stood slowly. The envelope was still there, but he no longer needed proof. The truth already had a face, it already had a scar. The next morning, the city was awakened by an out-of-season storm. Lightning streaked across the sky like spears of fire, and ancestral drums seemed to echo beneath the earth. The people said that when the heavens revolt like this, it's because the heart of a just man has been wounded. The Council of Ministers had been urgently summoned. No one knew why. Everyone assumed a new rebel attack or some military movement in the north, but what awaited them in the main room was not a report. Ibrahim Traoré entered, not in his combat uniform, but in a traditional deep blue tunic, embroidered with gold threads and ancient mossy symbols. He was barefoot, a gesture of mourning. As he entered, he looked into the eyes of each person present before speaking. "There is something I must say, and it will not be easy." The silence was absolute. "A man close to me, a man who shares my name and my blood, has sold his soul to the enemy. He shared our plans with foreign forces. He betrayed his land, and as much as my heart bleeds, I cannot ignore it." Everyone understood. No name was spoken. But that same afternoon, a private plane landed at Ouagadougou's airport, coming from France. Dawood Traoré was on it. He had come voluntarily. He had told the press he wanted to clear up misunderstandings, but the truth was he knew. He knew his brother's silence was the gravest of warnings, and he knew that if he ever wanted to look in the mirror again, he would have to face this. The meeting between the two was private. Only 4 witnesses, 2 veteran soldiers, a spiritual advisor from the Gourmanche ethnic group, and the Air Force's most senior colonel. The room was dark, lit only by a thick candle at the center of the table. "Why, Dawood?" Traoré asked, his voice steady, without hatred. His brother hesitated. His eyes were swollen. He seemed smaller now. Without the arrogance of the photos, without the expensive suits, just a barefoot man before the abyss he had dug with his own hands. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he whispered. "They said they would help, that they would invest in schools, hospitals. They said you were too radical, that they were worried about the country's stability. And you believed them?" Silence. "You believed them, and not me? Your own brother?" Dawood didn't answer. A tear fell, but it was too late. Traoré stood, He walked to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. For a moment, the younger brother thought he might be forgiven, but Traoré said, "I love you, but I love the people who trust me more. I cannot protect you from this." He turned to the officers and said, "Take him. Treat him with dignity. He is a traitor, but he is still a son of this land. And in this land, even those who err have a right to justice." As he left the room, Traoré's eyes were dry, but inside, something had broken. In the weeks that followed, the trial was quiet. There was no spectacle, just truth. Documents, recordings, and a public confession. The people wept, not for the traitor, but for the man who had to choose between his blood and his homeland, and chose with pain, but chose rightly. In the days following the trial, the city of Ouagadougou sank into a respectful silence. It was not the silence of fear, but of collective introspection. It was as if the nation's heart beat in rhythm with Ibrahim Traoré's, and everyone felt, even without words, the weight of that impossible choice. The state radio played ancestral songs. In the squares, the elders told stories of ancient times when brothers clashed not out of hatred, but over vision. And the youth, they looked at Traoré with renewed reverence. He was not just a leader. He was a man who bled inwardly without letting pain betray his mission. One morning, while visiting an orphanage in Koudougou, Traoré was surprised by a child who ran toward him and clung tightly to his leg. The caregiver tried to pull her away, but Traoré knelt down. The boy had large eyes, dark as wet clay, and he said only, "You still have a brother, even if it hurts." That broke him, not in front of the boy, but that night, alone in his home, before an open window, with the Sahel wind touching his face, Ibrahim Traoré wept, not for the betrayal, but for the void, for the memory of two boys running barefoot through sorghum fields, dreaming of changing the world together. One still fought, the other had surrendered, but an entire country awaited direction, and pain, he knew, either destroys us or purifies us. It was in this context that the most unexpected and most dangerous proposal arose. A Russian diplomat, who for months had tried unsuccessfully to meet with Traoré, finally secured an audience. He came alone. No security, no interpreter. He spoke near-perfect French and had in his eyes something reminiscent of winter. "President Traoré," he said calmly, "we know what happened, and we also know the Americans didn't act alone. There's more than espionage in this story." Traoré listened in silence. "Your brother's name appears on other lists. He wasn't just selling information. He was trying to broker a deal to establish a foreign military base on Burkinabe soil. A protection agreement, as they call it." The anger that rose in Traoré's chest was cold. Not an explosion, but an ice that began in his bones. If this was true, and his instincts told him it was, Dawood's betrayal went beyond documents. It was an attempt to subjugate again the sovereignty so many had died to restore. The diplomat continued, "We have proof, but we're not here just to warn you. We want to propose an alliance. Security, intelligence, logistical support, in exchange limited access to lithium mines. Transparent, public contracts, real benefits for the people." Traoré stood. "I didn't trade one empire for another, nor did I sell my people for promises. Africa needs to stand on its own, even if it costs your life." Silence. "Freedom always costs someone's life," Traoré replied, "but it's too sacred to be sold for tons of rocks or seductive words." The meeting ended without an agreement, but that encounter awakened something in him. The need to dig deeper, to uncover what else lay hidden behind his brother's betrayal. He summoned his intelligence chief, the old Colonel Caboret, a man who knew the corridors of darkness like few others. "I want everything, every name, who knew, who profited, who pretended not to see." For 7 days, Caboret and his team delved into the darkest archives. What they uncovered was more than a conspiracy. It was a system. Dawood had been just a pawn, well-positioned, yes, but still just a piece on a board where foreign interests, corrupt local politicians, and international businessmen gambled with the lives of millions as if they were casino chips. One name, however, stood out. Adama Ouattara, a Burkinabe businessman, owner of one of the country's largest mining networks, a former financier of political campaigns, a close friend of European diplomatic figures, and, according to the reports, Dawood's silent mentor. It was he who drafted the reports. It was he who arranged the meetings. and it was he who for years had been trying to silence patriotic movements through blackmail and obscure deals. Traoré summoned him to a public meeting, in front of the cameras. It was a historic moment. On the left side of the table, the revolutionary president in a black tunic with a red sash across his chest, symbolizing mourning and struggle. On the right, the smiling businessman, in a light grey suit and eyes that didn't blink. "Mr. Ouattara," Traoré began, "do you know why you're here? I assume to clarify rumors. They're not rumors. They're evidence. And I'm not here for explanations. I'm here to offer you a choice." The businessman furrowed his brow. "The choice to confess before the people what you've done to this nation, or to let the facts speak for themselves in a people's court." The room fell silent. The cameras trembled, and Ouattara, for the first time in years, seemed vulnerable, but he was cunning. "And if I confess, what do I get in return?" "Dignity," Traoré replied, "and perhaps a chance at redemption. The people know how to forgive those who admit their wrongs, but they don't forgive those who lie while looking them in the eyes." That night, Ouattara made the most impactful confession in the country's recent history. On national television, he read a letter revealing deals, names, figures, and asked for forgiveness from the youth for the hope he himself had destroyed. It was like thunder. In the streets, crowds wept. In the villages, drums played in a sign of renewal. And in the schools, teachers used that speech to teach about courage, truth, and repentance. But not everyone was satisfied. Hours after the confession, a car exploded near Kaboré's home. He survived but was injured. The message was clear. The war was now against the system, and the system would fight back. Ibrahim Traoré did not retreat. He gave a speech in the heart of the capital. He stood on an improvised platform, surrounded by orphaned children and widowed mothers. He spoke from the soul. "We are not at war against people. We are at war against everything that taught us to hate ourselves, to sell ourselves, to think our worth depends on the gold we have and not on the people we are. Today, true independence begins, and it will not be signed with ink, but with courage." In the weeks following Ibrahim Traoré's speech, something different began to sprout in the heart of Burkina Faso. It wasn't just hope, it was awareness. The people no longer waited for saviors. Now they knew the future was built in silence, in sweat, in collective work, in vigilance against the lies that for centuries had come disguised as international aid. There were more watchful eyes, more voices rising, more hands willing to plant where before there was only scorched earth. Kaboré's recovery was slow, but the first visitor he received in the hospital was Traoré himself. He sat beside the bed, held his hand and said, "You weren't wounded by bullets, Colonel. You were wounded by the truth you protected, and that makes you stronger than any war general." The old warrior smiled with wet eyes. He knew he didn't fight for glory. He fought because men like Traoré still existed. Meanwhile, Dawood remained imprisoned, not in an ordinary cell, but in an isolated place where he spent his days in silence, writing in old notebooks. The guards said he asked for nothing, spoke little, just wrote, and every week he sent a letter to his brother. Traoré never replied, but he kept each one in a simple wooden box, as if one day forgiveness might sprout between those silent pages. The international press tried to downplay Ouattara's confession. They tried to ridicule Traoré, calling him authoritarian, populist, dangerous visionary. But in the villages, where truth is measured with the eyes and not with words written in another language, Traoré was more than a president. He was a symbol, a son who had refused to sell his father's grave, a brother who sacrificed what was most intimate so that no one else would have to sacrifice their children. Then came the final coup attempt. At dawn, unidentified planes violated the northern airspace. Explosions were heard near the border. Intelligence confirmed. It was an attempt to reinstill fear. A foreign force wanted to sow chaos and accuse the government of instability. Traoré didn't hesitate. He put on his uniform, took his weapon, and went to the field. He didn't send a delegate. He didn't record an institutional video. It was him, with boots caked in dirt and eyes steady as rock. The soldiers, seeing him arrive, stopped. One by one they fell into formation. The silence was solemn. "No one will invade our land without feeling the weight of our love for it," Traoré said. "Today we fight not for revenge, but for memory. We fight for our ancestors, for our children, for those who can no longer shout but still live within us." The battle was short and victorious. But in that field, amid smoke and embers, Traoré knelt, not to pray for himself, but to weep for the fallen youth, sons of a soil that always demanded too much of its children. He knelt, placed his hands on the earth and said, "I swear, this will be the last innocent blood spilled here while I live." And that night, upon returning to Ouagadougou, he found an envelope on his desk, another letter from Dawood. This time he read it. "My brother, I know you still hate me, and perhaps you're right, but I need to tell you what I couldn't in our last conversation. I didn't sell myself just for money. I sold myself because I felt too small next to you, because you were the hero and I the shadow. And so, I tried to be great through the wrong paths. Forgiving me is hard, I know, but know this. Everything I know about courage I learned watching you walk." Traoré closed his eyes. For a moment the world was silent, and in that early morning, unseen by anyone, he took paper and pen. And for the first time he wrote a short reply. "I never hated you, but I had to let you go. If one day you are free, return as a man, not as a brother. Return as a servant of justice." He folded the paper, placed it in the same box, and left. The next morning the people awoke to the sound of drums beating in the city centre. It was the day of an ancestral ceremony, but it wasn't a celebration. It was a rite of passage. Traoré, dressed in dark linen tunics, climbed the steps of the main square. The sun rose behind him, gilding his face with a light that seemed eternal. And before elders, soldiers, children and mothers, he said, "What we've lived here is not just politics, it's purification, it's birth. It's the end of the era when we accepted chains disguised as aid. Today we take back not just our lands but our souls," the crowd shouted, not out of hatred, but out of truth. And as the dust rose and the cries echoed through the hills, it seemed that all of Africa was awakening, like an ancient lion finally opening its eyes. That day, Ibrahim Traoré was not just a name. He was a symbol, and like every true symbol, born of blood and sacrifice, he no longer needed to prove anything, only to exist.